All right, we're getting started.
All right, how many do we have rolling in so far? All right, well, we still got some people filing in here, so either way, we're going to get this thing started. So first of all, just want to say that we're blown away by the number of people who registered for this class. We've actually got close to 2,000 registrations, people from all over the country, actually not just the country, but all over the world. I know we had at least one guy come in and leave a question from Germany. And that's pretty cool to know that there are people from all over the world who want to jump in on this hunt class, learn about trail camera strategies, and talk about whitetail hunting. I have not hunted in Germany. I did hunt in Poland one time and passed through Germany. I hope to go back there at some point, but as far as I know, there aren't any whitetails over there. So hopefully, if that guy is on, he'll be able to apply some of this stuff to whatever species of deer it is that he's hunting overseas. So most of you are already HuntStand users. And for those of you who are still outliers, welcome to HuntStand. As the slide says here, HuntStand truly is the #1 hunting and land management app in North America. So what exactly does that mean? Well, put simply, it means that more hunters use our app than any other app for planning successful hunts and being stewards of this great land and our wildlife. HuntStand is the full-fledged mobile app and mapping system with a bunch of different map layers and weather forecasting, wind direction forecasting, game movement prediction, and a lot of other tools that you can use to plan and execute your hunts. We also have a dedicated content team, which is where I spend most of my time. We publish regular articles, videos. We hold events like this hunt class. We have a weekly podcast hosted by Will Cooper, who's on here right now, and a bunch of other information that works hand in hand with the app to give you all the resources you need to have a better experience as a hunter. And on top of that, we often partner with great brands like we've done tonight with Stealth Cam and Muddy to bring you events like this and special promotions. So speaking of the special promotions, we have something going on right now. It's called our Total Whitetail Property Makeover Contest. And it's really cool. All you have to do to enter the contest is write in or submit a video and tell us why you want us to help you improve your deer hunting land. The grand prize winner is going to get a personal property walkthrough and custom management plan from our in-house wildlife biologist, Brian Murphy, who works full-time for HuntStand. The guy has decades of experience as a whitetail manager. And on top of that, we're going to help that winner deck out their property with $10,000 in gear from Stealth Cam, Muddy, and Evolved Harvest. So if you don't win the full package, you're still going to be eligible to win a digital management plan and $1,000 in gear. So go to huntstand.com if you haven't already and submit your entry. Total Whitetail Property Makeover Contest. This is definitely something that you do not want to win. In terms of content, we've got a bunch of stuff hitting the field notes section at huntstand.com and on our YouTube channel. One of the newest pieces we just launched on Sunday is a video series with Bill Winke called Deer Dirt. And this is a series dedicated to land management and whitetail hunting strategies. So odds are if you're attending this hunt class tonight, you're probably going to be interested in watching this series. Bill is going to be covering the gamut of stuff, ranging from how to find your dream whitetail hunting property to how to set it up and hunt it. New episodes will be rolling about every other week on our YouTube channel, so be sure to check that one out. So let's get into tonight's hunt class. We've got a great night planned, packed full of information. First thing I want to say is be sure to stick around for the entire thing until the very end, because we're going to be giving away 5 sweet prize packages to some random winners, but you have to be here at the end to be eligible to win. And also at the end, we're going to be answering a bunch of questions that you guys submitted during the registration process. And if you have any questions during this live event, be sure to use the live Q&A right here through the HuntClass, through the Zoom here. And our guy, Will Cooper, is going to be on there answering all the questions that he can in real time. And he's also going to cherry pick some of those for us to answer as a group at the Q&A session at the end. Now, tonight is really all about trail camera strategies for the world's most popular big game animal, which is, of course, the white-tailed deer. And specifically, we're going to be covering some early season trail camera tactics that you guys can put to use right now. You can go out tomorrow and start employing these things to have a better deer season. And what else are you going to do? It's July, it's hot, and I don't know about you, but I'm already looking forward to deer hunting. So this is a great way to get started in that process. Josh Honeycutt is the main host. He's a deer hunting fanatic, outdoor writer, and a HuntStand Pro contributor. You're going to find a lot of his regular content at huntstand.com. He also does some video stuff for us. Josh has been around the block. As you can see here, he's got credentials including Outdoor Life, Peterson's Hunting, North American Whitetail, deer and deer hunting. Josh has quite the resume as a deer hunter, and I would certainly call him a whitetail expert. So his experience with trail cameras certainly is well-rounded. He'll be deep diving on trail camera strategies, but we're also lucky to have our buddy Chris Duncan here to kick it off by talking about the latest in trail camera technology. If there's anyone on the planet who knows the nuts and bolts of trail cameras, it's going to be Mr. Duncan. And believe me when I say the guy also knows a heck of a lot about killing giant whitetail bucks. So if you're already a stealth camera muddy trail camera user and you have any technical questions or customer service related questions, please make a call or send an email. You got the information right here. Otherwise, it's really easy to find on the Stealth Camera Muddy websites. Tonight, we're here to have fun and focus on becoming better whitetail hunters. So now I am finally going to turn it over to Mr. Chris Duncan to talk about the latest in trail camera technology.
Thanks, Josh. So as Josh mentioned, Chris Duncan, I've been with Muddy for around 9 years now and Stealth Cam, so quite a while, and born and raised in Southern Iowa, and just very fortunate to have always had lots of public land right out my back door, and also some permission farms that I've hunted for a lot of years, and in the last few years was able to purchase my own small farm. But what we're going to do today is we're going to dive into all kinds of things, as Josh mentioned, trail camera related. I'm going to kind of go over a lot of the new stuff for the year when it comes to stealth and muddy with our cameras, with our app, with the data plans, and then we're going to go to Josh here in a little bit to talk about more strategies. So as you guys know, moving to the next slide, trail cameras. Then I remember when I first started running cameras, and I was looking actually when we were building this presentation, and I found the first cameras that I ran were from right around 2000. And I think they were called Trail Timer Pro or Trail Camera Pro. But anyways, I found those albums not that long ago. We recently moved and they were sitting in an old tote. And looking back, it's amazing how far technologies came and the direction that it's going. The last 20 years or 23 years since I ran those cameras, the technology has just gained so much, and who knows what the next 20 years will bring. Back in the day, you guys all remember who have ran cameras for a long time, they'd use those film rolls. And when we first started, I remember it was they would take 24 photos, you'd go check them. And I remember getting home from school and I'd run back behind my dad's house and check the camera, and it might have 12 photos on it. So then I'd let it sit there for a few days longer. And then as soon as it got full, we'd run up to 1 hour photo. And a lot of you guys who have ran cameras for a long time, you guys remember those days and what I'm talking about. And then it was the next big thing was when they could hold 36 photos on that camera roll. And that was pretty awesome. And then we went into the digital cameras where we had SD cards, and then into today's technology with trail cameras now. And even in the last 4 years, the cell cams have came so far. Um, the cell cam technology just continues to get better and increase. So today what I'm going to do here is talk to you guys a little bit about that. So if Josh, you want to flip through a few slides here. So looking into the stuff that Stealth and Muddy that we have going on now, a lot of pretty cool things. As you guys can see here on this slide, all new cell cameras for 2023 have dual SIM technology. So what that means is that our cameras come equipped with both AT&T and Verizon SIM cards pre-installed. So it takes the guesswork out of trying to figure out what cameras or what service works best in your area. Basically take that camera, take it to your hunting location or wherever you want to run it, turn it on. And upon turning it on, it's going to search for the best network in your area, and it will connect to the best network in your area. So you might have one farm that's like where, for instance, like an example, some of the farms I hunt, AT&T works better. But then if I go 30 minutes south, Verizon works better. So no longer do I have to worry about picking AT&T or Verizon. Our cameras come with pre-installed, both of them, both SD cards or SIM cards in those cameras. Some of our cameras in our lineup, for instance, the Deceptor that has no glow technology now at a price point that is pretty amazing at $129. So depending on what you want, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, no glow versus low glow versus, whatever infrared you want, we've got all of that. Couple other pretty exciting features that our app has this year. We have the ability to do on-demand photos and video. Besides the Muddy Mitigator, that's just a photo camera, but the Deceptor no glow and IR, and then the Muddy Matrix and Stealth Fusion X Pro, those all do on-demand photos and video. So within a matter of seconds, you can have photos and videos sent straight to your device, which is pretty amazing. And there's a lot of reasons that you might want to use that. It could be anything from making sure that your entry and exit is clean when walking in and out. We've been testing these for a while now, so I'm part of the beta testing program we have here. And last year during late season, I put a couple on both sides of my food plot, and in the evenings I would sit there and just press on-demand photo or on-demand video, whichever one I'd wanted. I'd get a really good idea on those big food plots what was out there. A couple other cool things that we've got with our cameras and the app this year is DVR mode. That's something we've had for a few years, but we get a lot of questions about that. So I figured I'd talk about that briefly. But one of the most frustrating things is when you put a cell camera out and the whole point is not having to go in there and check it. You don't want that SD card to get full. So if you put it in DVR mode, that card will no longer get full. What it will do is once it does get towards the end and it does start to get full, it will overwrite the oldest images or videos on that card and allow the camera to continue to take photos. Few other things that we've got that are pretty cool. You now have the ability to share your albums with other hunters. I know that's something that a lot of us have asked for, and we delivered this year. So, I've got some of these cameras that I use for security, some that are on my personal farm, and then I've got a few leases that I hunt with a few other buddies. That what we can do now is I can just share specific albums with them, and as long as they have the Command Pro app, then they can accept that invite, and then they can view all of those photos or videos that are in that album. So that's an awesome upgrade for 2023 that all of our cameras have. And then they also have remote firmware updates. So you don't have to go into the field anymore with an SD card and update that firmware. You can now do that remotely right from the app, and the app will notify you when that camera is ready to be updated. There's a few other things that I don't want to go into a lot of detail about, but it's pretty exciting stuff, and stuff that we will be launching later this fall, later this summer actually. And it's gonna be in regards to our filtering options. So right now we can filter based on time of day, for example, the temperature, certain cameras. You can filter by favorites. You can create your own custom tags. But now that we've partnered with HuntStand and a lot of their technology, we're going to be able to take this to another step further that is going to be really exciting. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of it, but we've been working on this for a while, and we're super excited to have these upcoming filters ready to launch here in the near future. So let's go into the next slide, talk about tips for choosing trail cameras. And one of the things I want to talk about is camera pricing versus key features. So let's go to the next slide. What do you typically get by spending more money? And you guys will all notice that cell cameras in general, you guys remember that when the first cell camera hit the market, you remember the price points. Price points have came down significantly, and the technology continues to get better. But within those price points, you'll still continue to get a handful of different things with the higher price points. So just keep that in mind. And a lot of it's going to depend on how you run your cameras, where you're running your cameras in the specific scenario of where you're running those cameras. So on the higher end cameras, you're typically going to have a further detection range. You're going to have a quicker trigger speed. And those are a few of the things that I really look for. The higher end cameras typically will have a higher megapixel. They'll have the ability to do video. Some of the lower price point cameras do not have the ability to do video, or if they do, they may not have audio. So there's a lot of things to consider when purchasing your camera. One thing I always tell people is there's a lot of camera options, and as not only hunters, but as users and developers of all of these cameras that we offer, we try to hit different price points and that offer a lot of different features. So there'll be, something that everybody can use. One thing that I would say is that if you're going to buy a camera that maybe has, like, let's say a slower trigger speed, so I would say like a 0.7 second trigger speed or slower, then when you set that camera up, just make sure you set it up appropriately. So that camera is going to do really well if it's angled down a trail. You don't want it like facing straight at the trail, because that animal is going to come by and you might catch the end of it, or it might not even be in that camera. So angle it down that trail, make that subject where you're going to have more opportunity to catch them on camera. Maybe you're going to have that camera on a bait site. Maybe you're going to have that camera on a scrape where those animals are stopping there typically, and they're hitting that scrape or the mineral site. If you're going to have it where you want to get a further detection range, let's say you want the best of the best. So in our lineup this year, that would be the Stealth Cam Deceptor. That's going to have a 0.3 second trigger speed. That's going to have a higher megapixel. That camera is going to be able to do HD photos, videos with audio, just all the bells and whistles. So a lot of things to consider there. Moving on to the next slide. Let's go one more after this. I kind of covered that one. The infrared versus the flash, and the no versus the no glow. So as I mentioned earlier, we offer all kinds of different cameras with all kinds of different features. And when it comes to infrared versus flash and glow versus no glow, that's really up to you as the user and what you want to run. I've got a neighbor, for instance, that he runs a lot of flash cameras, and there's some people that will say that flash cameras scare deer. Well, that's, if you guys all remember back 20 years ago, that's all we ever used. And I think a lot of it's going to depend on when it comes to scaring a deer or spooking a whitetail. Josh will talk about this later when it comes to setup as well. But one thing I've noticed through the years of really being able to live in an area where I can follow deer for year after year after year through these cameras is that oftentimes it is literally the specific deer you're hunting and what his temperament's like. Is he cagey? Is he non-cagey? Just like us as people, there are deer that have different personalities, and some of them, it doesn't matter what type of camera it is. If it's an infrared, if it's a no glow, flash camera, it doesn't matter. That deer, if he sees a camera in a tree, he's going to try to avoid it. So there's ways you can set these cameras up to try to hide them. There's areas in this in the country that get way more pressure than other areas, where deer just will not tolerate human intrusion as well. They just have a ton more pressure, and you just can't get away with as much. You know, when we look at the pros and cons of these different flashes, the flash cameras, they have the color, obviously, which is pretty cool to see. Which we did that with the infrared, where we do allow that night color AI, where you can click that and it will turn the infrared photos to color, which is kind of neat. But also what will happen with flash cameras is you can have it where that flash goes off, a deer could be running by. There's not going to be as much blur versus an infrared or a no glow. When we talk about a low glow infrared camera versus a no glow infrared, the no glow is going to be invisible to the human eye, to the animal's eye. It's a true black flash camera, so it's really good for security. The technology on those cameras has came a long ways. It used to be where I would say that it didn't feel like it just, the quality wasn't quite there when it came to the photo quality, but that new Deceptor has proven me wrong on that. That no glow camera is amazing. And then obviously the infrared, where you have the low glow, that might be able to illuminate a little bit farther, maybe a little bit clearer nighttime photos. But again, it's all in your style of hunting, the deer herd you're hunting, and how you want to, what route you want to take there. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. Okay, so this is a question we get quite often, and especially with the price of batteries nowadays. It seems like the cost of batteries has just skyrocketed. So this is a question we get: or what batteries should we use? What accessories should we use? And then what SD cards should we use? So I'll start with the SD cards. What I always tell everybody is we always recommend a class 10 SD card. Make sure that it's formatted and no bigger than 32 gigabytes. Like I said, you can always put DVR mode on, so you don't have to worry about that card filling up. When it comes to batteries, lithium will last a little bit long. It will last longer. And then when it comes to accessories, definitely look into a lot of the accessories that we offer in the Stealth and HME lineup when it comes to solar panels or battery boxes that also have solar panels on them. I've got some cameras that have been out for over 12 months now. And when you look at the cost of investing in solar or an external power source, maybe it's 12 volt battery box, for example, those pay for themselves very quickly. And we also, like I mentioned earlier, we want to be as least intrusive as possible. That's one of the biggest reasons why we love running cell cameras. So making those batteries last as long as possible is key. So definitely look into some of the accessories we offer. And then also when it comes to extending your battery life, there's some things that you can do just within the settings of the app. So when you've got a camera that's on instant, its battery is going, it's going to take more battery than if you have that camera where it's going to upload hourly or once or twice a day. So I would say that if you have a camera that's not in an easy accessible place, then you might want to run that camera on hourly upload or twice a day, unless you've got it on an external power source. Also, one thing I want to mention, as I talked about earlier, on-demand photo and video. If you guys are using our new cameras and you want to use that feature, then I would highly recommend that you are using some type of an external power source, because on-demand, just like instant or instant group, can definitely put a little bit more stress on that battery life. So next slide here, we're going to quickly dive into our data plans for the year. And we've got a few different options. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I'll quickly hit on the high level stuff. And if you guys want to learn more, then you can go to gomuddy.com or stealthcam.com, and you'll be able to see everything you need to know about all of our plans and the specifics of those plans for 2023. So when we're looking at monthly, they go as low as $5 a month. On annual, they're as low as $4 a month. And that includes 600 photos. So I think that's something to definitely look and compare and see what makes the most sense for you. One thing I do want to say that we offer is we have 0 hidden fees. So I know that in the past there's been some other manufacturers out there that they may advertise a certain monthly fee for monthly unlimited, for example, but to be able to fully utilize all of the features of the app, for instance, like HD downloads or HD video, you potentially may have extra incurred costs there to be part of a club, to just be able to access or have the ability to download those HD photos and videos. And that's one thing that we wanted to make. We wanted to have everybody be able to access, and we didn't want to have any hidden fees. So our most popular plan is the monthly unlimited. And in the past, that was $20 a month. What we've done with that now is it's $20 a month for the first camera. And then the second camera is $15 per month for monthly unlimited. And then the third camera and beyond is $11 per month. So it's a tiered structure, a tiered pricing plan. And then, like I said, there's standard and plus options as well for you guys to consider. So I think with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass this along to Josh again.
All right, thanks a lot, man. That was a lot of great information. And I know that you're going to be popping back in here at the end for the Q&A, where we're probably going to address several of the things that he didn't cover in his presentation, but we got some really great questions. So you're going to want to stick around till the end. And once again, stick around because we're going to be giving away 5 really, really sweet prize packages to 5 of you randomly who decide to stick it out till the bitter end here. So I'm going to turn it over to my man, Josh Honeycutt. So let me just have a second here to stop my screen share. He's going to jump in with his part of the presentation, and he's going to teach you guys how to pattern more deer, make meat, put some more trophies on the wall, all the things we love to do as deer hunters. So here we are with Josh Honeycutt.
Hey guys, everybody can hear me and see me all right? Everything good?
Yes, sir.
Good deal. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm an outdoor writer / editor. For those of you who aren't familiar with that trade, I'm a full-time, my day-to-day deal is dealing with words. To be an outdoor writer, you have to be a deer nerd, a grammar nerd, pretty OCD, and half smidge, just a little bit half crazy. So it takes a special breed to be an outdoor writer when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of words every day, but it's a fun job. So I'm also a new dad, so I'm going to do my best to hold back on the dad jokes and keep us focused on early season trail camera strategies here today. There's a lot of really good info that you guys have already gotten from Chris and Josh. I'm going to try to do my best to live up to the standard that they've put forth here tonight. But we're going to jump right in. You know, I've been a lifelong hunter. Started whenever I was young and still am one today. Born and raised in Kentucky. Now I've been blessed to hunt throughout the United States, as well as in Canada. Most of my time spent in Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, you know, that mid-south and southeastern portion of the Midwest. And that's really where my stronghold is, as far as where I've spent most of my time chasing whitetails. But I have hunted as far west as South Dakota and everywhere in between, down to South Carolina. So it's fun being able to hunt different places and see what works in one place, what might not work elsewhere. But back, you know, that's enough about me and my background. Back to the trail camera discussion. You know, I've learned a lot of lessons throughout the years. I run a lot of trail cameras and I've learned a lot of things. Some of those are obvious. Some of them are not so obvious. One of the more obvious, most trail camera problems are preventable. When we have issues with trail cameras, oftentimes it's because of poor maintenance, or it's just simple user error. So we try to keep those things from happening by implementing proper preventative measures to keep those issues from occurring. Another lesson learned that video mode reveals far more info than photos. Now, photos are great. They're extremely valuable, but video gives you so much more insight on so many different levels. One of the biggest things is just learning really the nuance and details that you find with each particular buck. When you're looking at each different mature buck, they all have different personalities. Now, they don't, not personalities in the sense that we humans have them, but they have tendencies. They have certain behavioral aspects about each individual deer that makes them unique. And so you can kind of learn those things when you're in video mode, especially when they're interacting with other deer. They might be a more subordinate deer, more aggressive deer. Other things that you learn from video mode is other details like direction of travel. You might see that a deer is coming in a certain way and leaving a certain way, where you might not get those fine details with photos alone. Another lesson learned is deer can seem calculative, especially when we're dealing with these really mature deer, but they're not really so much calculative as they are reactive. Deer can't rationalize, not in the sense that we do. And so it's really important to when we're trying to figure out why a deer is doing what he's doing, he's simply reacting to his environment. So we're looking at where that deer is bedding, where it's feeding, where it's watering, the human intrusion that's involved, seasonal needs, things like that. So they're not necessarily calculative so much as they are reactive. And when you know that they're reactive, you can learn exactly, or at least try to determine what's making them do what they're doing. Environmental factors obviously are another thing. They change monthly, weekly, even daily within a deer's habitat, within their home range, within their core areas. And that basically leads to both to short, mid, and long-term patterns that are driven by various bedding needs, changing food sources, hunting pressure, and other factors. Another thing, the most recent info is the most important. That is key when it comes to using trail cameras. Most recent intel trumps everything else. Things can change very, very quickly. However, when you're looking at all of your historical data, that's obviously very important too, especially when you're dealing with multiple years of history with the deer, and we'll talk more about that later. And finally, direction of travel on first and last frame when you're dealing with photos or videos. These are extremely important when you're trying to pattern a specific deer with your trail cameras, because you're looking at what the time of day, where that deer came from, time of day, where that deer went to. That applies to morning hunts and evening hunts. And so you're really looking at those direction of travel. Lines of movement are everything whenever it comes to hunting whitetails, patterning them, trying to figure out exactly what you're going to be doing as far as your tactical approach goes. And so those are things that we definitely want to pay attention to. Obviously, once it comes time to look at general trail camera deployment, we've got a lot of different categories that we're going to talk about here. The first is benefits of summertime cameras. Herd inventory, that's big right now. I know a lot of people don't like to do that in the summer simply because they don't think they're going to have those deer around in the fall. In some cases, that's true. In a lot of cases, that isn't. Personally, I retain anywhere from 25% to 75% of the deer that I have on camera this time of year in velvet. Of course, every property is different. Every deer is going to be different. But when you're looking at all the different factors that are involved there are certainly benefits to having those cameras out in those spring and summer months. Determining what deer in that area, again, it can depend on the property as to whether or not summer bucks will be there in the fall. Most of that, in my opinion, in my experience, hinges on the quality of bedding cover and the type of bedding cover that you have, as well as the quality and types of food sources that you have. If your property is offering what that deer needs in the spring, summer, fall, and winter, I see a lot better retention as far as summer versus fall goes. So anyway, a lot of people don't like to do that. They don't like to put their cameras out until bucks have kind of settled into those fall ranges. But I have experienced that, again, 25 to usually for me, it's 40 to 50% of the bucks. If I have them on camera in velvet, I'm going to be able to hunt them fall. It's especially important if you have an early season opener like I do here in Kentucky. We open that first weekend in September. And so when you're able to hunt that early season time frame, that really early season time frame versus like an early October or mid-October opener, those deer might still be on their summer patterns. And so if you're fortunate enough to be in one of those situations, definitely think about that and consider that summertime trail camera usage. Obviously, watching velvet grow is fun. Monitoring other species such as predators, varmints, and other game animals, that's really fun because we love to keep an eye on the properties and look and learn and determine, the health of all species and of wildlife that are living where we hunt. Patterning bucks, again, if you have that early season opener, like a early September, mid-September, even a late September opener, you might still catch some of those deer on a late summer pattern, depending on the scenario, depending on the food sources and stuff like that that's going on in that area. Obviously, if you're going to let cameras soak for long periods of times, which we're going to talk about that a little bit more too in a little bit, that's another reason to put them up in summer, because if you don't want to be invading bedding areas and stuff like that come October or September or even August. If you're going to soak cameras in bedding areas, I like to do that no later than probably June or early July, mid-July at the latest. And then finally, security. Obviously, that's a great thing to have when it comes to trail cameras. It's definitely a use case, is keeping those trail cameras out there for that purpose. And so that's definitely a summertime use case as well. Obviously, we talked a little bit about disbursement here. Of course, 1.5-year-old bucks, when they hit a 1.5-year-old, anywhere from up to 75% of 1.5-year-old bucks can disperse from their birth range into a new place. And that can be anywhere up to 15 or 20 miles of distance between their birth range and their disbursement. Now, obviously, we're talking more about summer versus fall here. Like this particular buck you see in the slide, this is a deer that always spent the summer and winter on a particular property that I hunted in Ohio, still do. But he basically would spend the summer months there and he would spend the winter months there. He would not be there during the rut really at all, at all during the rut, or even the pre-rut for that matter. I would have him in velvet and then he would show back up sometime in late December. So you will have some bucks. For me, he was part of that 25 to 50% that I don't see, during the bulk of hunting season. And so that is a factor and something that you can determine about particular, target bucks when you have multiple years of history with an animal. And that's something you can kind of build up over the course of 2 or 3, 4 years when you're looking at that historical trail camera data versus your current trail camera data. All of that's relevant. When you're trying to identify specific bucks, when you're looking to see if it's a return deer from a previous year or if it's a new deer that you've never seen, there are certain things you want to pay attention to: facial coloration, fur patterns, fur coloration, body size, body scars, markings, antler spread. Obviously on the body, the body markings to facial coloration, those bullet points, that's all body related. Those are really important. When it comes to the antler aspect of that deer, those are also really important as well. Antler spread, antler mass, tine length, brow tines, abnormal points. Those are all can be unique things that you see in a deer. Like for instance, on this trail camera photo, you're looking at the brow tines here. This is a buck that I've had numerous years of history with, and he's always got that left side brow tine that's just a little bit longer. Sits just a little bit higher on the beam than his right side brow tine. And that's just one example. And of course, this deer has always been very narrow. He's never been more than, like, as you see here, probably 13 and a half inches inside. And so you can definitely tell what deer it is. But even on the facial coloration, so when you look at this deer's facial coloration, like right here, this forehead color right there is very, very different from deer to deer. Even this part of the deer here, and I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. I think you can. But anyway, you can look at different things. Even the white patterns around a deer's nose are going to be distinct. And when you look at the bottom side of a deer's chin, you can sometimes see very particular, so that's hard to see in a trail camera photo, but you can kind of see what I'm saying. all the white markings around the eyes. The color of this right here can range from a very soft gray to a rich red, to a rich red to even a blackish color. And so all of these things can be unique. And obviously behavioral tendencies is something that you can look at too. Moving on, considerations for deploying trail cameras. These are just generalities here. Obviously you want to be scent conscious. Whenever I'm on private land, and I don't have to worry about crops or anything like that. I like to use an ATV or a side-by-side to basically drive up to those, so I don't have to put any kind of ground scent anywhere near my cameras. Obviously, that's going to be more important as you get closer to hunting season and into hunting season. And obviously, when you're putting out your trail cameras, you want to do it in a manner that has like a top-down approach. So you want to make sure you have enough cameras to deploy into those really, really important areas, and then kind of go down the line from there. Because you don't want to start putting cameras out and then get to your best spot and realize, oh, I don't have any cameras left. Obviously, if you need more, you can go to Stealth Cam or Muddy's website and fix that problem. But you definitely want to make sure that you use a top-down approach. And obviously as well, another thing that I like to do is place trail cameras in layers. And I'll dive deeper into that in a few minutes, but really there's 3 layers or stages of trail camera deployment that I kind of think about whenever I'm using them. If I have an abundance of cameras, I like to have my first layer on food sources. Those are easy to get to, not a high risk of pressuring deer. The next layer is generally in staging areas. Maybe it's a water hole just inside of cover between food and bed. That's kind of that secondary layer of cameras. And then that deepest layer, the third layer, are going to be cameras that are actually in bedding areas. And I don't like to put them directly over a deer's bed. You can do that, but I don't take it quite that far. But I do like to put trail cameras in just the bare edges of these bedding areas, whether it's a pre-rut or summertime area where bucks tend to bed, or if it's a doe bedding area where I'm going to see kind of good buck traffic come October and into November. You can do that as well. Obviously, if you want to put those cameras deeper, those need to be either SD cameras that you leave them alone all season long. You don't go in there and check them. You put them out in June or July or even earlier, and then you don't check them until you go shed hunt in the winter. You leave those alone because you don't want to be going into a bedding area to check an SD camera. Better yet is to deploy a cell camera in those instances, and especially if you're able to pair it with an external battery source, such as a solar panel or an external battery box also, which you can get on Stealth Cam's website as well as Muddy. So when you're looking at those deployments that are deeper, even those secondary layers, especially if they're hard to get to or you can't reach them with an ATV, those are probably going to be better suited for cellular cameras with external battery sources as well, simply because you don't want to be going into those deeper layers to check those SD cameras unless it's after the season. Chris has already done a pretty good job of talking about cell cameras and SD cameras, when to use one versus the other. I certainly can't do it better than he's talked about it. But, like I said, for my personal use of these, you really want to focus on, okay, how easy is it to check that camera without spooking deer? If I can't spook that deer, or if I can't get to that camera without spooking that deer, it needs to be either a SD camera that soaks all season long and remains unchecked until after the fact, or it needs to be a cell camera with an external battery. That way you don't have to worry about, invading that area to fix that camera. When you're looking at trail camera locations, there are some that are all season locations and some that are seasonal. Starting with good all season locations, these are generally terrain and water based. Some examples include pinch points, funnels, saddles, inside field corners, isolated water holes, mineral sites if it's legal where you're at, bait sites if it's legal where you're at, scrapes, mock scrapes. These are just examples of things that are generally good all season locations. Again, if you're going to go the bait or mineral route, you want to make sure you're following your state wildlife agency's regulations there, as well as the use of deer scents in mock scrapes. All seasonal locations to consider. These are generally bedding and food based, because obviously a deer's needs are going to change, both from the bedding perspective and the food perspective throughout the year. Again, we were talking about patterns earlier, both short, mid, and long-term patterns. Sometimes short-term patterns last a day, depending on the conditions. Mid-term patterns might be a few days or a week. Long-term patterns, in my opinion, are anything that's going to, be 2 or 3 weeks, such as like an early season, soybean field that's going to remain green for some time. Maybe they were late beans or something like that, or it's a variety of soybeans that don't turn yellow until later in the fall. Those are a couple of examples of those longer term patterns. But definitely look at seasonal bedding areas. For like this time of year, it's early season. We're going to be talking about that here in just a minute too. So you want to look at seasonal beddings for the time of year that you're in. Food source edges. Again, food sources change frequently. Staging areas are going to be dependent on the type of food source that the deer is targeting at the time. So where the food is, and influences where the staging is. Small food plots are good seasonal locations as well, depending on what you've planted, whether it's an early season or a late season food plot. So definitely think about those things when you're looking for trail camera locations. Personally, when it comes to deploying trail cameras, I like to deploy those first, then start glassing, simply because if you're hunting a lot of different properties or a bigger property, you want to be able to know where to focus your time while you're in the field. I like to minimize that as much as possible because I don't want deer seeing me, hearing me, or smelling me. So I'll prefer to put those cameras out first, let them kind of tell me where to pinpoint my time or focus my time when it comes to actual in the field glassing, because it certainly is an important aspect of scouting and definitely should be integrated with your trail camera plan. When you're keeping track of all your trail cameras, if you're like probably most of the people here watching tonight, you have a lot of trail cameras. Those of us who are here presenting tonight, we have a lot of trail cameras. It can be difficult to keep track of those. Fortunately, HuntStand is an exceptional tool for that, a very good tool. And you can actually plot the exact location of every trail camera that you have. You can name it. You can put in, specific details about it, all the way down to which direction that camera is oriented. And so definitely keep track of your camera locations that way. Before I started using this tool, I would find cameras that had been lost for 2 or 3 years at a time. So it's something that you should certainly do. There are other benefits that we'll go into here momentarily as far as keeping track of your trail camera locations in HuntStand, but that will be a discussion here in a few minutes. Looking specifically at early season trail camera locations, these are some areas to consider. Obviously, there are others, but warm season bedding, if you're looking at like an early September opener, like here in Kentucky, it's pretty hot. I mean, we deal with temperatures in 70s, 80s, at times even in the low 90s. It's rare, but it happens some seasons. And so warm season bedding is still really important. Generally, I find the most success on north facing slopes. I'm going to go into some situational scenarios here in a few minutes to talk a little bit more about that and kind of show you what I'm talking about on maps in real life cases with deer that I've hunted. But other places, scrapes, mock scrapes, those are good. Deer, a lot of people think, or some hunters think, that deer only scrape during the rut, October, November, maybe a little in December. That's not true. Deer will scrape year round. A lot of the research shows that obviously the rut is when that activity peaks, but there are certain scrapes generally on every property that get used year round, even in the spring and summer months. That includes bucks, does, and even fawns. I saw a video, had a video of a deer, of a fawn, or saw a video of someone had posted of a fawn that was rub urinating in a scrape. And this fawn was about a month old, not very old at all. And it was rub urinating in a scrape in summer. So if that fawn's doing it, obviously you're going to have adult deer doing it as well. And of course, I run my trail cameras virtually year round, and that's what I see. A lot of adult deer using scrapes, even in the spring and summer months. Water holes are excellent early season trail camera locations. I personally like to put in these small water holes in strategic locations. Definitely think about trail emergencies or emergencies where they come out into bigger, field destination, field food sources like soybeans, corn, stuff like that. Trail intersections are great. Fence crossings, staging areas, ag field edges, micro food plots. If you're going to put a trail camera in a micro plot, really small, in a micro plot, kill plot, whatever term you want to put on that. Generally, I like to shape those certain ways, such as hourglass is probably my favorite. An hourglass or figure eight shape is my ideal go-to there. But turkey foot shaped, so you got like a three-pronged food plot. Other examples, W-shaped, Y-shaped, anything that kind of funnels deer to a vertex or a kind of a pinch point. From a hunting perspective, obviously that's great if you're bow hunting, but from a trail camera perspective, it's really good too. And so I like to put trail cameras within those micro plots, within the vertex of those, and you'll have a lot more success that way. Inside field corners, apple trees, persimmons, other soft mass trees that drop during the early season. White oaks tend to drop a little earlier than the red oaks, and deer love those way more. So those are obviously go-tos. Chestnuts, obviously not as common. Since the blight, wiped those out decades ago, but a lot of these chestnut trees are coming back, and you can actually plant certain varieties of chestnuts that are resistant to that blight. They have engineered a new, it's called the Dunstan chestnut, and they've engineered that to where it's basically almost completely the American chestnut. It's like 99% American chestnut, but they've put just enough Chinese chestnut tree into the mix to where it's resistant to that blight. And so if you're looking for good quality wildlife trees to plant for your deer, especially consider chestnuts. A lot of the research has shown that deer prefer chestnuts over acorns in a big way. So definitely consider that. Obviously, minerals sites, bait stations, those are good as well. But moving on, when we're looking at trail camera deployment, there's really three phases, at least, I kind of break it down that way. The first is to find a target buck. You want to cast a wide net to do that. You're looking at a very big area of ground, potentially. Maybe you're looking at a small area of ground, but if you have multiple properties, you're trying to find that deer or a group of deer that you're going to be focusing your time on throughout the season, or at least the first phase of it during the early season. So that requires casting a wide net, putting out as many trail cameras as you can. Phase two is going to be to kind of home in on that deer. You want to learn its core area, its patterns, its tendencies. And then phase three is going to be to move in and tag that deer. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about here in a minute are going to kind of go into the details, the nuts and bolts. But first, let's look at the situational scenario. This particular outlined area is a property that I have hunted for a few years, or hunted for a few years. I know this property. I've kind of been all over it. I've shot several deer here. I have a friend who has shot a couple of deer here, so I know it pretty well. And so we're looking at a property for potential trail camera location deployments based on an area that I know. So looking at the map here, and based on what I know about the place from having boots on the ground and from actually hunting there during the early season, pre-rut, rut, and late season, some really good, or what tend to be really good early season trail camera locations here are highlighted with these white dots. For example, here in this southern portion of the property, this is a really easy to get to area to check a trail camera, especially if it's an SD camera and not a cell camera. And I can access it from the east here, get to that camera, check it while these deer are bedded up in the hills, and they never know I'm there. So that's a really good early season trail camera location, in my opinion, that's not going to disturb deer. Same here. There's a big logging road that runs up through here where my cursor is. So as I'm talking, just you can kind of look at my cursor and see what I'm talking about. But it kind of comes out into the field here, goes up into the hill, circles around, comes back. And these deer just use it as a highway to get down into these fields. These fields are full of clover, and they hit those a lot in the afternoons and at night. And so that's a good area just to take inventory, not trying to pattern a deer necessarily, but just to get inventory. That's a great spot. This is a great spot. More times than not, it's going to be a picture that's taken after dark, but that's okay because we're not actually patterning deer right here. Same with this one over here. It's just another travel route that these deer take out of the hills down into these feed fields. And they're really easy to get to. Check them from the back of the four-wheeler or vehicle, and you're good. These camera locations here are a little bit more sensitive. These three would be what I consider layer one, because I was talking earlier about 3 layers: layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. These would be what I consider layer 1 trail camera locations, very low impact. Those can be SD cameras that you check. Maybe, obviously I wouldn't go crazy with it, but you can check those a little bit more frequently. This was what I would consider probably a layer 2. This particular area, I do not put trail cameras so much in here, at least cameras that I check, because this is pretty thick early successional habitat. These deer spend a lot of time right here during the early season. This up in here is more mature timber. This right through here is more early successional habitat. There's a lot of blowdowns, a lot of trees, a lot of dead ash. And so there's a lot of open canopy here, and it's just thick and nasty. There's also a creek that runs down through here. And so the deer during the early season, even though it's not a northern slope, they like to bed there because it's close to water. This is a northern slope though. And so I see a lot of deer bedding here during the early season. This right here, again, layer 1, layer 1, layer 1. This is a layer 2. If I had a camera up here, I would consider that a layer 2. This is what I would really look at as a layer 3, because that's deep into the property. You can't get there unless you're more than likely going to spook deer, unless you're using the low impact entry and exit routes that I've established or discovered for hunting purpose. But I don't want to use those just to check cameras. I mean, you can, but I don't like to. I don't want to go that deep. So what I like to do here is to deploy cellular cameras here, here, and here. That way, I don't have to go in to check these 3 cameras to know what's going on. Cell cameras here, here, and here are going to be extremely beneficial. They've helped me extensively. Down here is where I deploy some SD cameras, and this system has worked well. So that's a scenario that this for a place that I've hunted for a long time, or for several years now, and I know it well, both from a boots on the ground aspect and just looking at it from an aerial map and studying it. This is a situational scenario 2. This is a property that I just leased. I've actually not put boots on the ground yet, but I had it on, had a good reason to go ahead and lease it, even though I did not actually inspect it in person. So just looking at the map of this property, even though I've not seen it in person, these are some areas that I would potentially look at for trail camera deployments, especially if I'm going to deploy them for the long term and let them soak, or if I want to go ahead and post up some cell cameras with some external battery sources for the duration of the season. And so I'm looking at pinch points for the rut. I'm looking at inside field corners for early season and throughout the season. A lot of the times, if you're wanting to put those SD cameras out, especially if you deal with a lot of fingers, fingers of cover, strips of cover like these here that you see. If you have a lot of SD cameras, but not a lot of cell cameras to use, generally what I'd like to do is put those SD cameras on these easy to reach points. That way I can slip in, get to those. Get to those without alerting deer, because most of these deer, this is a south facing slope. So, whenever it's colder in the winter, these deer can probably more likely going to be down here. And this is a south facing slope. And so a lot of the times, if you're coming in later in the season, you can check those without alerting deer. And so when you're just from an early season standpoint, again, I like these inside field corners here. Deer also are really apt to enter fields, in the lowest points. From my experience, they like to funnel out into the open with the wind in their face, and thermals of an afternoon are stronger in the lowest points because everything just kind of goes downward. And so you can't see it on this view, but this here is a really big low point, and this is a big low point on the property, as well as down here. And excuse me, right up here. Just when you look at these properties with a terrain-based app layer, you can see that those are all pretty big low points. And so those afternoon thermals are going to congregate in those areas, and that's where a lot of the deer, especially the mature deer, are going to enter into those fields. I don't always, it's hard to get away with those areas as stand locations unless you're in like an enclosed box blind a lot of the time, just because it's harder to manage the wind. But it can make excellent locations for your trail cameras to get consistent, reliable information. So those are great cell camera locations that you can pick. Moving on to scenario number 3. This is a property that I was fortunate to hunt by permission for several years. And this is a family member of mine, a relative who I filmed shoot a deer here. We're not going to show you that hunt because it's just too long, but I am going to show you some of the property breakdown. And this is just some drone footage of it. You can see a road, county road here. There was a house off here, down here to the southwest. Right now we're facing east. And so you can see here, that's a small area. This is, excuse me, this is all soybeans. This is just early successional habitat. This is mature timber. And then I've got a food plot planted right there in the middle of it. All of this around it is just grass, and that's about shoulder high grass that you can see. When it comes, I'm going to pause it briefly. So this particular, well, let me play it just a little bit further. So you can see here, that's one of those, that turkey foot shaped food plot I was talking about. And this was all with an early season mindset. This is a late September hunt here in Kentucky. Basically, this is a property, this timbered area. So it's larger than 10 acres, you know, when you look at the deed, but everything around it is just standing soybeans, and it's an open field. So there's not as much huntable ground here. There's really only 10 acres of huntable ground. So when you look at this, we hunted this particular tract, this 10 acres, with one stand, one camera, one food plot. So some situations are going to call for a lot of cameras depending on the property breakdown, and some might only call for one. And so you don't want to under deploy trail cameras or over deploy trail cameras. So this particular situation, I would have done more harm than good if I used more than one camera, because it's such a small, compact area, and this deer was so ingrained in this particular core area of his. I would have done more damage if I used more than one camera. So I had one camera right here in the vertex of the food plot, one tree stand right here in the vertex of the food plot. And this deer was spending a lot of his time here. I mean, he was a homebody. And so, of course, you know, I wasn't the hunter who killed it. This is a family member of mine, but I filmed the hunt, and this is here is where you can kind of see where that took place. So when we come back here, I want to come back for just a moment, get to where we can see things. So again, that tree stand is right here. Trail camera is right there. And then you can see here that we planted Egyptian wheat to conceal our entry if there was anything, you know, in the food plot, as well as to hide our exit when we left. But again, you're facing east here, so the turkey foot's kind of facing east. This deer bedded in several different locations. So after we shot this deer, he was the only mature deer in there. So afterwards, we really went in there and picked it apart to figure out exactly what he was doing, which it wasn't hard to figure out to begin with, but I wanted to find his exact beds. And he had several beds right up here on the edge of this timber. He had a couple up here and a couple over here. And what I believe was occurring was he was bedding in each of these different locations depending on wind direction. The day that we actually hunted this deer, of course, you know, with this particular setup and our access, which came from here, we parked here and eased through the timber here, you know, circled around, kind of fish hooked up into that stand location. But whenever the day we were successful and my family member was able to tag this deer, it was an east wind. And so that wind was actually coming straight through that food plot, straight into our faces and kind of tailing back down off here. So it wasn't a due east, but it was kind of like a northeast, east-northeast. And it's kind of fish hooking down through here and going back down toward the bottom because those afternoon thermals were kind of going to the low points. And so it's kind of tailing back. And we also had a couple of ponds that were down here to the south. And so they were kind of pulling down that way too. But anyway, this deer was bedded on the day of the hunt. He was actually bedded up here with that east wind behind him. A lot of these mature deer, they'll bed with the wind at their back. And he circled all the way around, came through here, come into this timber, and then circled into that food plot with the wind in his nose. And we had that just off wind direction. So our wind was going through here. He was circling in through here. We actually watched that deer groom himself. He made 2 different rubs, made 3 different scrapes, all right in here before he emerged into the food plot. And so again, back to the trail camera talk, which is our focus tonight. That trail camera that I had placed here showed me what that deer was doing and how he was emerging. And I knew when we had east winds that deer was coming right through here, hitting that camera, going out to the food plot. When we didn't have east winds, he would circle in from a different direction. And so that kind of helped me determine when we were going to be best suited to make a play on that deer on this small property where we only needed 1 camera, 1 stand, 1 food plot. Moving on to our next slide. This is a situational scenario number 4, and I'm going to let y'all play. I'm going to try to play this video. This is a hunt that, well, I'll just play it real fast. It's not very long. It's more of just a brief collection of clips from that particular hunt. It's not the full thing. From several years ago in 2018.
Be able to take my biggest buck ever, right here on the family farm.
And so I'll pause it there. Nobody wants to hear me talking. But here, when we're looking at the map, this particular scenario is another good example of looking at your trail camera data and not just saying, oh, that deer is there. He's there. I'm going to hunt him, but really digging in and trying to figure out what that deer is doing. So these white dots are where I had trail camera locations. The orange dot is where I actually put an arrow in that deer. And this is a small property. Like I said, it's a small family farm. Some of it's actually sold. And so this particular part of the farm here is actually no longer huntable to us, but this part back here is. And so when you look at this deer was hitting a trail camera right here, and that we plant a food plot. It's hard to see because of the tree canopy, but there's a food plot that's in this woods right here. And he was hitting that in daytime every day, all summer long. And then right before the summer, he seemingly vanished, not vanished, but really changed his patterns because whereas I was getting a lot of daytime pictures of this deer in July and August, right at the beginning of September, he just suddenly shifted, and I hadn't been in there to pressure him. So I knew it wasn't anything that I had done. But for some reason he did shift, or at least I thought he did. And so whenever I was looking at trying to figure out what play to make on this deer, I finally just decided to move in and do an observation sit. So I did an observation sit right here. That deer was still on a pretty solid pattern, but the problem was he was bedding right here. And so I had cameras down here, and this was before I was running cell cameras in this particular area. And so I just had 3 SD cameras out, one on this pond down here because it's a good place to soak a camera. I never checked that until after the season's over, so I couldn't check it. This particular area right here, I had a camera there, which was an SD camera, but I really didn't want to push that close because this is a north slope right here, and I didn't want to get that close to the deer to check that. So the only one I really checked was this one down here. And because this deer was bedding up here on this north facing slope close to the water, which is common for early season deer, he he was coming across this hay field, which has a lot of clover in it. And so they were staging up in this clover field before they went on down to the neighbor's ag fields, which that year was a soybean field. So I had this one camera that I was trying to pattern this deer with because I didn't want to get cameras close to him because he was bedding so close to that field edge, or at least I expected him to be. And so I finally went in and it's just a prime example of pairing your in the field glassing with your trail camera efforts. So you don't want to just rely on glassing and in the field scouting, and you don't want to just rely on your trail camera intel. You want to combine those to get the best picture. Of course, if I would have had cell cameras, and here's the cell camera pitch. If I would have had cell cameras deployed here on this pond and here on this corner, I would have known all along that this deer was still pretty much on the same pattern that he'd been all summer long whenever I was getting pictures of him in daytime right here, except he had just decided he no longer wanted to feed in that food plot right at the beginning of September and was just feeding straight across this hayfield and going off into the neighbor's beans. So if I would have had a cell camera here and a cell camera here, I would not have wasted, time and wouldn't have wasted time even on an observation stand, which was the first day I saw him. I would have moved on in to harvest this deer. And so that's really the big thing with cell cameras. They can give you that real-time information and do it in a manner that's not going to alert these deer to your presence. So again, I ended up shooting this deer. So I hunted this deer right down here on my cursor at one point. Saw the deer was coming out into this field, but he never did come in close enough for a shot. He was crossing down over here, but he was hitting this corner. And so I noticed that with my observation stand sit. And so the next day I moved in and did a hang and hunt right down here on this corner and was able to be successful. But long story short, this was a scenario where I only used SD cameras, and I would have been far better off if I would have used cellular cameras. When we're looking at implementing situational tactics, these are, again, same property. You'll see the same map here. These are 4 bucks early season bucks here in Kentucky that I shot 4 years in a row, all in the same, pretty much a general area. Every single one of these bucks, this was 15, 16, 17, and 2018. Each one of those hunts were incredibly different, even though all 4 of these bucks were shot within a 50 to 60 yard radius of one another. And so those are these hunts. I'm not going to play every bit of that because I'm running so late on time here. But I'll skip ahead and let you see some of the stuff. This was the 2016 hunt. I already showed you the 2018 hunt just a few minutes ago, talking about that situational scenario. But this was 2016. I don't have a hunt to show you guys for the 2015 hunt, for the 2015 deer. And he kind of got out on the frame on me because it's really hard to self-film. And I was kind of learning how to do it at that point. And then this was the deer right here was 2017. Same general area. Completely different scenario, or situation, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. I'm just kind of showing you the hunt so you can see them. And then we'll talk about how different they were and how trail cameras, my trail camera tactics differed for each one of these.
Well, here he is. We got to.
And so you can see there that all of these bucks were killed on the same property. All of them were shot within about like I said, 50 to 60 yard radius. All of them were completely different scenarios, even though they were all early season deer. This was a September velvet deer, this was a September velvet deer, and this was a mid-October deer. But all of these were on early season bed to feed patterns still. So historically, even though I only had the 3 trail cameras out for the hunt for this deer right here that I showed you the hunt of first, these are the green dots are typically where I put trail cameras on this property. And as you can see, the white dots are where these deer were bedding at. And then the orange roots or orange lines are the routes that they took from their bedding areas to the white dots where I released the arrow on those deer. So even though this is the same property, this area you're looking at right here, kind of in the outline of my cursor, is about 25 acres, maybe 30. And each one of these deer, even though it was early season for every one of them, they were all bedding in completely different locations. And this is how situational tactics vary from property to property, from situation to situation. Even on the same property here, the situational tactics from 2015, 16, 17, 18 were vastly different. My 2015 deer, which was this one, was bedding on a northern facing slope right here, coming through here, feeding through some oaks, coming out into this hayfield, and I ended up shooting that deer right there. 2016, this deer right here was bedding on this is another north facing slope, so you can kind of northern facing here, northern facing here, northern facing here. And this 2016 deer right there was bedding in here, coming through here, feeding on the oaks, coming up into the food plot. 2017 deer was quite a bit different. He was bedding somewhere off down to the southwest, could have been in this pocket of timber that's on the property, could have been bedding on the neighbors. But anyway, the day that I shot him, he come up through here, and this was his typical MO. This was his pattern. He would come up by this pond, come out into this field, come over here into the food plot. And then of course in 2018, he was bedding up here, come through here, come out into this field. But this is just an example of 4 different deer, 4 consecutive years, same little 20-acre spot. All of them require different trail camera tactics, different hunting tactics. Obviously, when these deer are bedding in completely different areas, they're going to hit different cameras. I'm going to need to take different entry and exit routes to make sure that I get in and out cleanly. And so that's how your trail cameras become so important, though, because if I had not have used trail cameras, I would have not been able to figure these deer out nearly as easily. And I would have run the risk of spooking these deer rather than, putting them on the wall and in the freezer. So definitely run trail cameras wisely. Again, as we were talking about earlier, doing that in layers, and sometimes layer 2, which is that secondary layer of cameras, it might be 10 or 15 yards deep. It might be 100 yards deep. It really just depends on how the deer are using that property. But again, these are what I would consider this one here, based on where the deer were bedding, I would consider this a layer 1, that maybe a layer 1, maybe even a layer 2 if that deer was spending time as close to this edge as I think he was. Layer 1, and then as you get down through here, probably a layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. And again, all of these were SD cameras. I was not running cell cameras on this property for these seasons. And so just remember situational tactics for every scenario that you're in. Whenever I checked these cameras, I always did that via an ATV because this is a working farm. And so the deer are used to that, and it was low impact. Again, this trail camera soaked all season long, never would check it. And I would only check this camera if I absolutely had to. I really relied on this camera, this camera, this camera, and this camera to pattern most of these deer. And then, so when you're thinking about your trail camera deployment, you want to use your trail camera intel wisely so that you know when to strike. You want to look at final selection of stand locations when you're trying to figure out your target bucks and identifying their patterns. You want to know what they're doing. And obviously, HuntStand is a great tool for that because of all the different markers that you can drop and pins you can drop on the app of each of your properties that you spend time on. That really helps you visualize it. And so one of the big things that I do whenever I'm postseason scouting is I mark all of these things: bedding areas, rut sign, scrapes, rubs, trails, food sources. Whenever I mark those, it really helps me to visualize how the deer are using that property. You can even take it as far as tracing your path on the app there, as you can see right here, to really basically show you the trail network. So if you can start that trace while you're walking those trails, pause it if you have to get off of them, but you can light up your aerial map of the property with the actual trail network. And then when you go in and you add in all these other different indicators and markers, these pin drops and what they mean, you just absolutely visualize what's going on that property from a historical standpoint. And then you pair that with your historical and your most recent trail camera data. And then you're going to have a firm understanding of what those deer are doing. Another thing that you want to do is use the command app for your stealth cam, your muddy trail cameras. Use those to keep track of what's going on with your cell cameras. You can even download these especially key images, you can download these with and then drop those directly into HuntStand. So one of the good things about HuntStand is you can mark your trail camera locations in the trail camera tab, but you can also house your trail camera photos for each specific trail camera that you have. It's good for multiple reasons. If you're trying to remember where a particular buck was spending time, all you got to do is go to your HuntStand app and see what deer was hitting what camera. Also, it helps you keep a secondary backup version of your trail camera photos, especially the ones that are most important to you. And so there's numerous benefits to use your Command Pro app in conjunction, in unison with your HuntStand app, because these two really do complement each other exceptionally well. And then doing so, that's going to help you determine when you should strike, when to move in, when to capitalize on particular patterns that you identify, or if you are preemptive. And what I mean by that is if you're trying to predict what's going to happen. And that's really important when you have multiple years of history with a target buck. So if you're fortunate enough to hunt a deer for 2 or 3, 4 years, most recent intel trumps everything. But when you're looking at those past years, you can almost be preemptive in your approach. Say the deer has a long-term pattern of showing up during the rut at a certain time, or showing up during the pre-rut at a certain time, and it shows up at a certain place, and there's some consistency there. You can look at that historical data and then almost be there when that deer arrives. And that's really the good thing about using or soaking trail cameras. Even if you don't plan on checking those during the season, you can still rely on that data, and it's very good data. Throughout, early season is a big time that a lot of people like to fill doe tags. Finding low impact areas to kill does is important, especially on properties where you hope to fill your buck tags. Maybe it's the only place you have to hunt, and so you want to find low impact areas away from buck core areas to fill those doe tags. And then finally, as I've talked a lot about soaking cameras, Chris talked about soaking cameras. I've learned a lot of lessons from doing that, as has anyone who has done this, I'm sure. But non-cellular cameras can provide general property usage info for next season. It can provide non-cell cams can provide buck specific property usage info for next season. Cell cameras can do that too, but it simultaneously gives you in-season information. So that can reveal if a buck is in a particular bedding area that day, or wherever you have it posted, whether it's a doe bedding area, buck bedding area, whatever, wherever you have it deployed. Cell cams are definitely, if you do go that route, you want to pair it with an external battery source to make sure you maximize battery longevity there. Topography is a major factor. This is another lesson learned. Topography is a major factor in the quality of a bedding area and when it's used. Benches, leeward ridges, ridge endings, it's easier to find bedding cover in areas with topography change, but early season, north facing slopes are king. And we talked about that earlier. Once the season opens and pressure starts, downwind sides of ridges are really ideal, because again, those bucks like to bed with their wind at the back. That's what I've seen in my experience, and other hunters who I greatly respect, they have said the same. Does bed in groups. Oftentimes when they're bedded down, you'll find those doe groups that are bedded with each other, and they'll bed down facing different directions. Bachelor groups of bucks will do the same. Oftentimes you'll see that big mature deer, he'll bed down with the wind at his back, and then the subordinate deer in that group will often bed down looking in other directions. And I have trail camera photos that show that, that depict that. Each buck, another lesson learned is that each buck expresses tendencies that create a personality, as we discussed earlier. Individual bucks have specific bedding habits, even down to how they sleep. So I've had some cameras over beds, and some bucks they sleep differently. And it's interesting when you start studying the nuanced details of how these deer spend time in their beds. But for example, some deer that I've had on camera in their beds, they stay kind of sitting upright pretty much all the time. Other deer, they'll lay flat out like they're stretched out, person stretched out on a bed, head laying on the ground and everything. And so it's really interesting when you study the unique traits with each deer. Some bucks move more during daylight than others. We know that, most hunters know that. Even though deer spend approximately 70% of the day bedded between their daytime and nighttime beds. Daytime beds are obviously going to be in that thicker cover. Nighttime beds are going to be out, on the fringes of food sources or even in food sources, maybe even staging areas. Most buck beds are used under certain wind conditions. So if you have like we talked earlier, how they like to bed with their wind at their back. If it's a south facing slope, they'll probably prefer to bed there with a northerly wind. Maybe it's east, maybe we have a west wind. And so if you've got, unless it's a really late winter or something like that, and they need that solar cover, that direct sunlight, they might be on an east facing slope. And oftentimes that's the good thing about those ridge endings or ridge points. And what makes them so good is if that wind does happen to shift throughout the day, especially if it's like a north to south, if it's, that point's facing south, depending on the way that wind shifts, if it's just slight enough, that deer might just get up and just move around that point a little bit. I have seen that by putting trail cameras on points in bedding areas. They'll shift their beds just enough that they keep that wind at their back. Sometimes they can do that in the same bed, but sometimes they'll get up and move a little bit of cover a little bit of ground, attempting to accomplish that. Obviously, there's some other things. There are many bucks repeat annual patterns year over year. We've talked about that. Every property has an X though, and that's really the big thing. Figuring out where a property's kill box is, so to speak, is important, and you learn that over time. You can figure it out in a season, in less than a season, but when you hunt a property for multiple years, that's really where the value comes in. That is figuring out that one spot. And especially if it's like a 50, 75, 100 acre property, oftentimes it's going to have like a 5 acre area that just kills the deer, and as we talked about earlier in those 4 bucks in that early season scenarios that we were talking about, all were killed within like a 60-yard radius of one another. It was slightly different scenarios, but that was the spot. And so definitely focus on that. And again, definitely mark all your trail cameras in HuntStand, especially cameras you plan to soak long term, because you will forget about those, especially if you're like me. And finally, it is good to consider your cameras. Chris talked about that a little bit, about how, it's not so much the trail cameras, in my opinion, that spook deer so much as it is how we use them. So trail cameras that in and of themselves aren't going to spook deer. Not really. I haven't had a situation where, in my experience, where I felt like a trail camera caused the deer to vacate the area or even really hurt my chances. But how we use them can hurt our chances. And so we want to make sure that we deploy them properly, deploy them in locations, deploying SD cameras versus cell cameras in a manner that is going to keep us from pressuring deer when we deploy them and check them. Other things that you can do is to run smaller cams, the stealth cameras, the cell cams that are out. They're kind of small bodied cameras, which I prefer because they don't have that big bulky profile that's going to be easier for a deer to see. Even if they do, I don't think it spooks deer that much, but there are things that you can do if you're worried about that. Again, use smaller cameras, run quieter models, add some camo. A lot of people, especially on public land, like to put a little bit of moss. That's what I prefer to do, is to put some moss like on top of the camera. You don't want to cover up the lens or the sensors, but you can kind of build up some moss around them to give a little bit of cover. You can post cameras higher, which is probably the best tip that I've ever used and implemented. Putting position, especially in bedding areas. If you're going to put a trail camera over a buck bed, you definitely want to have that thing up high. You do not want that deer seeing it. So I prefer to have it about 8-9 feet in the air, angled downward on that bed, if you go that route. Personally, I prefer to just post them in the edges of bedding areas, on trails that are leading in and out, as that seems to be a little bit less impact, but you still want to get those cameras up because you don't want that deer seeing that trail camera in the bedding area. I don't worry about deer seeing my cameras quite as much on the those layer 1 trail camera locations that are talking about, field edges, stuff like that. Not as big of a factor for me in those situations. Again, if you're putting them out on public land, that's another thing you can do though to keep people from seeing them as well as deer, positioning those cameras higher. And then you can also spray down. Some people will choose to spray down their cameras whenever they deploy them for scent perspective, but you want to make sure you clean off that lens and that sensor if you do that. I think that's all I have to say. I've ran my mouth for long enough. I'm going to turn it back over to Josh here.
Holy smokes. Thank you so much, man. That was a seriously incredible amount of information. So we're all just going to give you a round of applause here.
Well, I appreciate that. Hopefully I haven't run off any of our attendees tonight.
No, that was seriously incredible. So much information. And I guess a few key takeaways that I would personally like to reiterate when it comes to your presentation is just really the importance of, when it comes to killing whitetails, the number one thing that you can do is make sure that you do everything in your power to ensure that they have no idea that you exist. Like, they want to live in their own bubble. They want to live in their own world. And one of the things with trail cameras that can be a catch-22, especially if you're not running cell cameras, is you are so tempted to go in there and pull cards. And that is one of the biggest benefits of cell cams, is that you don't have to make an impact after you deploy that camera and deploy it properly with a lot of the advice that we gave you here today. So when it comes to deploying cameras and adjusting settings, just make sure that you have things dialed. You really need to go into it with a lot of forethought, and you need to consider every single impact you are going to make on the landscape, because whitetails are very, very sensitive and smart, and they adapt on a dime. So just consider all that stuff while you guys are out there doing what you do. We want to give away some of these prize packages right now. We've got 5 prize packages. Each one of them has a stealth cam, Deceptor cellular trail camera with a solar pack, a Muddy Preview 4 ground blind, a Hunting Made Easy trail camera holder tree mount, and Hunter's Combo Pack 7-inch saw, so you can saw some of those branches out of the way when you're deploying your cameras, and a 1-year subscription to HuntStand Pro. And the 5 winners who we are keeping, or we are awarding these to, who are still on the call, who are still on the Masterclass, would be Daniel Breimer, Mike Copeland, Rebecca Lane, Coley Riley, and Keith Kurtz. So we will be hitting you up via email. We have your email from the registration to make sure that we can deliver these to you. Congratulations, guys. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you learned a bunch from this hunt class from HuntStand and Mr. Chris Duncan and Josh Honeycutt. It has been a great evening. And also, for the rest of you who are on this hunt class, who have stuck around, we're going to award you in another way, and that is by giving you a 20% discount to any trail camera from Stealth Cam or Muddy, or any HME product. HME has a ton of different hunting accessories. Just like, it's going to be really easy to figure out what you want because there are so many different options. So 48 hours, you have 2 days from now to redeem this code. Use Masterclass 23 on the Stealth Cam website, the Muddy website, or the HME Hunting Made Easy website. And you're going to save 20% on your total purchase. There's no limit on that, but it's only good for 48 hours. So make sure you take advantage of it. Now we are going to roll into the Q&A session. We got a lot of great questions that came in during the registration period, and we've got some questions that came in during the live session. Will Cooper, who's also the host of the HuntStand podcast and is part of our content team, he's been answering a lot of those questions in real time. And so has Spencer and Justin, 2 other members on our team. So hopefully we answered a lot of those questions, but we do have a few that we're going to address here live from some of you guys that you submitted during the event. So I'm going to have Mr. Honeycutt and Mr. Duncan dump back in here with your audio and your video feeds, and I will direct these questions at you guys, depending on who I think is the best candidate to answer them. So the first one we've got is from Daniel Watson that came in at 7:08 p.m. So almost an hour and a half ago. And Daniel's question was, bucks and most deer are only showing up on camera in the middle of the afternoon. No morning, evening, or overnight pictures. What does that mean as far as camera placement? Are the deer not bedded nearby? I have never had pictures only show up in the dead heat of the afternoon without morning, evening, and nighttime photos. My cameras are located in the South Florida Everglades, where deer are hard-horned and starting to chase, which is really, really incredible to think of, that those deer are starting to chase right now. So this one I'm going to direct to Mr. Honeycutt. And if you want me to repeat any of that, just let me know.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that I have never hunted Florida. That is a vastly different part of the country, so I can't really speak to that aspect of it. But just from the sheer focus of why you're getting midday pictures, if they are starting to chase there, which we do know that the rut in Florida is so vast, it kicks off in July, and in other parts ranges all the way to February and early March. So it is a really cool state, dependent from that aspect. But I would assume that if it, you're into that chasing period where you're at, that you still have to be fairly close to a bedding area with your placement, in my opinion. And I would love to hear what Chris thinks about this myself. But I would think if you're getting a lot of midday activity, that you're probably really close to bedding, and maybe not so close to where these deer are feeding at.
I completely agree, Josh, with what you said there. It sounds like those deer are bedding really close there, and that's why you're getting that midday movement.
I would venture to say that there's probably some water nearby. Of course, it's Florida, water's everywhere, but there may be some water there too, that a lot of these deer, maybe they're hitting a water hole or something while they're, because that I do have a lot of really good midday activity on cameras and on stands that are focused on water holes during the rut and pre-rut, so that might be a factor too.
Yeah, and I could weigh in here as well. I think Daniel, perhaps, I don't know how many cameras you have out. You didn't specify that, what kind of distribution you have, but I would agree with these guys. I mean, generally in my experience hunting around the country, if you've got deer that are moving around during the middle of the afternoon, you're picking up on camera, you probably are pretty close to bedding. It might be some type of secondary bedding. It might not be primary bedding. It might be something that they're kind of hanging out near there during the middle of the day, coming out, feeding, browsing on something. And then at some point in the afternoon, maybe they're going back into some primary bedding, and then they're not coming back again till later. But it sounds like maybe you need to have a couple of different camera deployments out there to get a little bit better pinpoint on what those deer are doing, but probably pretty close to a bedding area. The next question we're going to get to is from Bonnie Hayes, came in at 7:12 p.m. And this one's for Chris. This is kind of a baited question because I know what the answer is going to be, but how can you switch a camera from Verizon to AT&T cell service? I think we have a pretty good solution for that.
Yeah, so maybe what she's getting at is, do you have to actually manually do it? But we took all the guesswork out of that this year. The cameras are pre-installed with dual SIM cards, and when you turn that camera on, it will auto detect the best carrier, the best network in your area, and connect to that network. And then what we've done is it will stay on that network until your test photo the following day. So once a day, every 24 hours, your camera is going to do a test photo. And at that time as well, it's going to look for the best network at that time and connect. So takes all the guesswork out and makes it pretty simple for all of our users.
Cool. Yeah, another one we've got here is it's a question, but I would almost take it as more of a suggestion that we can consider in our development moving forward, both with HuntStand and then with Chris's end with Stealth Cam and Muddy cameras. Question is from Scott Allender at 7:15 p.m. Do you have, or do any cameras have GPS? I hunt public land only, and I want to be able to track them if or when they are stolen. So Chris, I don't believe we have any cameras right now that have a built-in GPS tracking functionality, but as time goes on and we develop more, that could be something pretty cool.
So our DS 4K transmit, which is our highest end cell cam, that new for 23 will have GPS. So all the new transmits do have GPS, and then going into next year, we're going to implement that into much more of our lineup. So I can't tell you for sure if maybe those lower price point cameras will have GPS next year, but that mid price point and up will all have GPS next year.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't even know that myself. So that's a huge asset, especially for public land hunters. Because I know that camera theft is definitely a problem. We got a lot of questions submitted in the preliminary registration process about how people can protect their cameras better on public land. And I know Josh covered some of that with how you can camouflage them, how you can hang your cameras higher so they're not right in the line of sight of people who are walking through. And even if they see them, they might not be able to reach them unless they have some sort of assistance to be able to climb up and grab them. Unfortunately, people tend to like to steal stuff sometimes. So sounds like we've got that solved with some of the products coming from Stealth Cam and Muddy. Another one here from Donald Dietz that came in at 7:22 p.m. He's from Northeast Georgia. I've tried several camera manufacturers, but I consistently have a problem with foggy pictures. I think lens fog after heavy rains. Although the interior of the camera is dry, the lens keeps fogging up, especially during high heat summer days after a rain. Is this common? How can I eliminate this fog problem? Or is there a specific manufacturer that has a camera that is fog proof? What do we got for that, Chris?
I couldn't tell you if there's a specific camera manufacturer that has that. I don't believe there is. I don't know if
Either.
maybe a lot of those fogging issues have to do with that camera housing and maybe the eave that is above that lens. I do know that, and I'm not saying that someone might not have fog or maybe potentially condensation build up on the lens of some of their cameras, but I run so many Stealth and Muddy cameras, and I typically don't see that issue. I don't know if, and this is me just speaking off cuff here, right? These are questions that just came in, so don't really have time to research it, but I don't know if maybe like those anti-fog sprays or something, if someone could put that on their lens, if they're experiencing that problem. I know when it comes to box blinds and especially when it's cold, and I'm running a heater on the inside, I will get condensation that builds up on those glass windows. And if I use like anti-fog wipes or sprays, it's like gone, and it stays gone for weeks. So like I said, off cuff there, don't know if that would help, but I really haven't ran into those issues with our cameras very often.
Yeah, I agree. I've had a couple of fog issues over the years, but it's specific weather conditions when that might happen. I guess just off the top of my head, a couple things to maybe consider would be to just put some thought into perhaps how the camera is positioned and what direction it's facing, so that if there is fog, maybe it could burn off faster. It might be counterintuitive to how we would normally place cameras. In other words, usually we don't like to place them into a predominant direction that the sun is coming from, but if you have consistent fog problems, it might help for some of that solar radiation to burn off that fog off the lens. It's going to be a give and take there, depending on what you're trying to go for images that are not affected so much by sunlight. But if you got a huge fog problem for some reason in some weird microclimate that you're in Northeast Georgia, you might have to try moving the camera around a little bit, repositioning it. Just some thoughts off the top of our head here, but that was a good question, and hopefully you can figure that out. The last live question that we're going to bring in here is from John Meal from 7:22 p.m. from South Carolina. And we did cover this earlier, but I figured it's worthy of bringing back up again because it is a topic that comes up often when you're talking about trail cameras, and especially in the past when this was more common. But does the flash affect deer? And I think what he's getting at is not just flash, but we talked about earlier the potential of trail cameras spooking deer, which is another big question that we had come in during the registration portion. In many different flavors, people ask that question, worrying about if trail cameras are going to spook deer. Josh, I'll give that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I have not had have not had many negative encounters. I don't feel like. I ran flash for years before I went to infrared and then no glow. And I don't think has a big impact on deer. I've had deer spend multiple minutes in front of flash cameras and then, them casually walk off. So I don't think they spook deer that bad. Again, every deer has a different personality, again, quotation mark personality. So maybe there's a rare instance out there where a deer is less tolerant of something like that, but I have not seen where white flash has negatively impacted a particular hunt for a target buck that I've had on trail camera.
Right on. I'm just going to go back and forth now with sort of a rapid fire session between Duncan and Honeycutt. This one's for Chris, starting it off. What camera will monitor the longest distance? So out of the stealth cam and muddy line, we're talking about detection distance. What do you recommend for the best detection?
The Deceptor. And that is, on the packaging on the website, that's gonna say 80-foot detection range, but I can tell you that is so conservative. I've been getting photos of deer that are 120 feet away. There's been some independent tests done. For instance, like a Trail Camera Pro, they showcased detection range on that camera. You can go there and look at that. But the Deceptor all day long.
Cool. Mr. Honeycutt, this is one that we got a lot of, similar to the question about trail cameras spooking deer. This is another one that we had a lot of different flavors, but ultimately the same root question. And that is, what is the best cardinal direction to face a camera? North, south, east, west? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't like to face camera toward the sun. So east and west are off the table for me. North and south are a little bit better, but again, when you get into late winter, you've got that sun that kind of stays in that southerly sky. So north is generally the best, but in my opinion, when it comes to trail camera placement, I prioritize effectiveness as well as situational tactics a little bit ahead of that. So I'm definitely not going to point a trail camera straight at the sun. But if I have to sacrifice a little bit there, a little bit of image quality to increase effectiveness, I'm more willing to angle that camera if I absolutely have to, a little bit more oriented toward the sun.
Makes a lot of sense. I agree. Back to Chris Duncan. Our hunting property has no cell service. What trail camera should be used in such a situation? So I know that a lot of what we talked about here tonight was the benefits of cell cams, but the reality is there's still a percentage of the country where people do not have cell service, which is a good and a bad thing. I was just out somewhere last weekend where I didn't have a lot of cell service and it felt pretty dang good, but also I wanted to throw some cell cams out. So it's that double-edged sword. But what SD cellular camera do we have in the stealth camera muddy line that you would recommend, Chris?
Yeah, so a couple things there. So one thing that I think that he should consider or maybe look into is a product that's in our HME lineup that is basically a signal booster that's got a cord and then an antenna booster. It's at the top. You can plug it straight into your cell camera. I know where I live, there's a big creek bottom that is down below my house, and without using those, I cannot get service. But when I hook those up to the camera, I can now get service and run my cell cameras in that creek bottom, which is going to be awesome for this year because it's something I've never been able to do. So definitely check that out. It's in the HME line. Other than that, definitely a question that has a lot of different answers, a lot of different directions that he could go. We've got cameras that run off, SD cards, digital cameras that, for instance, our wild view line and stealth cam, you can buy a 3-pack for $99. It's more of a basic camera, lower megapixel, not as far of a detection range. But if you're putting them on, if you just want to flood your property with cameras, put them on, spots and set them up in ways where you don't have to, worry about having a quick trigger speed. You're not quite as worried about having those crystal clear photos, then that would be what I would go with. If you are one of those guys that you want the best photos, the best video, then go with a higher end camera like the DS4K. That camera is amazing. It's got crazy good battery life. You can put that camera out and like Josh talked about earlier, let it soak. And that thing is, you're gonna be able to check it during shed season and pull that card and have a ton of great intel there. So just a lot of different options. But really can't go wrong. You just got to go to our website and look to see what makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, and I'd say that there's no question where you do have cell service and where you do have the budget for it. Cell cameras trump all, because what we talked about earlier with minimal impact being and low hunting pressure, just low pressure, human pressure in general, probably being the single biggest factor to effectively kill whitetails and especially mature bucks. Cell cameras are the way to go. But Josh brought up some great points earlier regarding his layering strategy. And there are still plenty of situations where you can get away with running those SD cameras in those low impact areas where it's easy to check the card. Or if you're just soaking cameras where all you're looking to do is evaluate a big period of time beforehand. Like if you're dumping one in a bedding area that you just want to go the next year and try to understand how the dynamics of that area work. But the thing is, you can get some really, really good deals, really stupid good deals on SD cameras these days, because now cellular has taken over. I mean, we're almost giving them away at this point. And there are plenty of situations where SD cameras are still very effective. And that DS4K that you mentioned, Chris, I've been running that thing. I have one from when they first launched. You would probably know what year it was. I don't know if it was, I think it was like probably 5-6 years ago or something like that. And that thing takes some incredible images, and especially HD video. I love that camera. I'm still running the same one. It has lasted through the Minnesota winters and year round. That thing is just incredible. Battery life, the whole deal. So if you are looking for cameras where you don't need cellular capabilities, so many great options, and you can get them for a steal at this point. Next one here, I'm going to kick over back to Honeycut. And this is an interesting one I've heard before from people. Would you put multiple cameras together aimed away from each other? And I'm not going to reveal anything too much, but we may have a solution for this in the future with some of our partners who manufacture cell cams. But in the meantime, Josh, I think what he's asking is, would you throw a bunch of cameras on the same tree facing different directions, hoping that you're going to get more intel than you would just off of one camera?
I think it's certainly a viable option in the latter stages of trying to pattern a deer, especially, or if you're in an area where a lot of trails converge from different directions, that would be another use case for that. Personally, whenever we're talking about the 3 different phases of trying to kill a deer, and how phase 1 and phase 2 are really trail camera focused, that phase 1, you're trying to cast a wide net to find a target deer, and then you find that target deer, and then you kind of refocus in a good positive way that's not going to alert that deer to your presence, but you refocus your trail camera efforts, kind of tighten the noose, so to speak, into a smaller area. So even if you don't have multiple trail cameras on the same tree, you can kind of push those into really close proximity of one another, especially if you're trying to really home in on that deer's very, very specific patterns.
Cool. And we have had some questions rolling in the live Q&A. People want to hear the discount code again, and I don't blame you. The discount code for StealthCam Muddy and HME websites for 20% off is Masterclass 23, valid for 48 hours. Once again, the coupon code to save 20% on StealthCam, Muddy, or HME products is Masterclass 23, all one word, no spaces, and that's good for 48 hours. So take advantage of it while you can. If you're going to be running SD cameras, you could probably get 1 million of them for not too much at 20% off. And we will also follow up probably with some sort of email or something just to reshare that code again for everybody who attended this class, because I know that you're going to want to take advantage of that. Going back to Duncan, how many cameras can you run through the Command Pro app at the same time?
As many as your heart desires.
That is a great answer. And it is very true. Yes, you can run as many cameras as you want through the Command Pro app. And it's pretty cool that you can run Stealth Cam and Muddy, depending on what flavor you're going for. Some great cameras in both lineups. And once again, it depends on your objectives. You really got to look through the feature sets to determine what's going to be right for you. Everybody's in a little bit different situation with what they need out of a cell camera. And frankly, everybody's in, like Josh talked about situational hunting tactics earlier, like there's even situations within the situation. So some cell cameras might be better off for certain specific locations on the same property, depending on what you're going for. If you're hunting over a food plot, or if you're somewhere where you can bait, where you know that the deer are going to be hanging around for a while, well, something like detection range or trigger speed, you're going to have different levels of priority on those things. And oftentimes those added benefits come with a little bit of a difference in price point. So it depends on your budget. If you're running a camera on a trail, you need that fast trigger speed, so you're not going to miss anything coming by. Or you used Chris's tip from earlier and make sure it's positioned properly, so you have a better chance of catching that animal on a longer travel path versus just that moment when it walks by the camera. But all considerations, and it's very worthwhile to look through and really consider before you make that investment what you're trying to get out of each individual camera. And odds are, if you're hunting one property and you want to buy a handful of cameras, you probably, maybe you don't want to just buy one model. You might want multiple models that cater to different feature sets. So just consider that, like spend some time thinking about it before you drop the dough. And if you do drop the dough, I'll drop that coupon code again, Masterclass 23, 20% off, Stealth Cam and Muddy and HME, which is a whole pile of accessories from Hunting Made Easy. That's really awesome. Back to Honeycut. How soon will you move a camera that shows no signs of activity? I check my data every 1 to 2 weeks.
It depends if you've got that camera in an all-season location, what you perceive as an all-season location, or if it's a seasonal location. If you're trying to determine how the quality of a property and you've got it in an all-season location that should be good year-round, you should be getting, if it's a good property or it lives up to your standards, it ought to be producing what you expect it to. If not, it's time to move on. If it's in a seasonal location, obviously you want to make sure that those cameras are there during the season that they're going to be optimized for, the time of year that they're optimized for. So if it's a seasonal bedding area or seasonal food source, make sure those cameras are there during the times that deer are going to be using those areas. And I've noticed, hunting small properties and large properties, that different parts of the property are going to see peak usage at different times. So it's really about understanding your property. And if you really understand your property and deploy those trail cameras to their utmost and get, milk the absolute most you can get out of those cameras, you should start to see those if the deer that you expect and hope to be there are there. So to answer that question, it depends, but really just make sure that it's an area that the deer are going to be using at that time of year. And if you think that they should be there and they aren't, maybe it is time to move on. So that the answer to that, depending on the situation, could be a week, 2 weeks, or it could be a month or two, depending on the location of that camera. So.
Good deal. We've had a few more things rolling in the Q&A from the winners, the 5 winners who won the prize packages from Stealth Cam, Muddy, and HME. Wondering what they need to do. They don't want to miss out on their prizes. Like I said before, we're going to hit you up with an email. You already registered, so we have your email address. Just be looking out for that, and we'll get your address to make sure those products hit you, and we will ship them out ASAP. We have so many questions that came in. We have hundreds of questions that came in, and I spent a few hours earlier this afternoon diluting these down to the best, what I consider the best questions. There are a lot of good ones. We're not going to be able to get through even all the ones that I picked. We have a lot of people still on this class right now, which we really appreciate you guys sticking around. But what we're going to do is we're going to take all the remaining questions that we don't answer, and we're going to do a Q&A post in the field notes section of HuntStand.com. So if you want to go there and find out some of these answers, either that you questions that you posed, or some of your friends here on the class who posed questions, and you're interested in getting those answers, we will have those next week at HuntStand.com in the field notes section. We're going to cover a few more here tonight. We're going to do 2 more to Mr. Honeycutt, 2 more to Duncan, and then we're going to roll out and wish you guys a good evening. So let's go to Duncan here. I know you have experience with this, running them for security. What are the best settings for security on driveways and gates?
So one thing to look for if it's for security is you want something that's going to be a higher megapixel camera. It's going to have video with audio. So whether you're running it on video or you're running it on photo, make sure it's in a setting that's going to give you that highest megapixel, highest HD video, because we're using it for security purposes. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have a camera that isn't giving you like that super clear image or video. So that's one thing I like to do. I like to have it on a instant group upload setting, so that way I'm instantly being notified of when that camera is triggered. With that being said, typically I will use some type of external solar pack or a HME 12-volt battery box with solar pack combo, and put those on my gate entrances to my farm or in my driveway to my house. So I think those are some of the things to really focus on and look at. Another thing that a lot of people aren't aware of that you can do with our cameras is you can go into the app and you can actually change the operating time. So you can make that camera where it's only going to take photos from let's say that you're only worried about it at a certain time, or there's contractors at your house that are back and forth all day, but you don't want photos of all those guys going back and forth. You only want photos after they leave. So you're maybe going to put that setting or that operating time at 6 p.m. until, whenever the next morning. So lots of different options there and some things to consider, but I think those would be the top things to look at: operating time, high megapixel video, and or HD video, and high megapixel photos, and then that instant upload.
Very cool. Here's another question that we had that once again, many variations of the same root question, and this is for Honeycutt. It's how many cameras should you have out per acre? Now this, I would say, approach this answer because of the way people are asking it. They can get as many cameras as they want, but how many is too many? Like, what's reasonable for, let's just say, per acre, if you can put it in that scale?
Yeah, it's really, I'm dodging everybody's questions tonight. It's really difficult to put a number to that. I think as many cameras as you can deploy, that you want to deploy without pressuring the deer herd. So obviously there can be a point to where the risk versus reward balance becomes, a little bit off. So you don't want to put so many that you're checking a lot of trail cameras and pressuring deer. But if you've got, you can put out trail cameras every 10 feet if you want to, so long you just make sure you are checking those cameras in a responsible manner so that you aren't alerting deer to your presence. Again, if they're cell cameras, it doesn't matter because you don't have to worry about that so much, especially if they're with an external battery source. But as far as determining how many per acre, it really depends on how that property lays out as to how many trail cameras are going to be adequate or provide adequate coverage, in my opinion. So if there's a lot of points and habitat changes and a lot of different edge cover in different places, a lot of topography changes. It's going to take a lot more cameras to cover those than say the same acreage somewhere else with just one block of cover in the middle of it and fields all the way around it. So the answer is it depends, but I would deploy as many as it takes to adequately cover that property while simultaneously making sure that you're not pressuring deer.
Josh, off the top of your head, that's somewhat related to another question that we had, which I think we might have covered a little bit earlier in the presentation, but that is determining buck to doe ratio, especially for serious deer managers who really want to manage their herd and get an idea of inventory buck to doe ratio. I mean, natural circumstances, we would have about 50-50, $5 for every 5 does. Most parts of the country, that's not the case, but that's usually what we strive for. So do you know what when a deer manager is running a trail camera survey, is there kind of a per acre kind of general rule that they go by? I feel like I've heard that before, but I can't remember the answer.
As far as number of cameras,
Yeah, I think it might not be per acre, but it might be like per 100 acres or something like that.
I don't know the number of cameras off the top of my head. I mean, I know what I've done, and generally, looking at some of you can kind of see the properties that some of the properties that I hunt with the aerial maps that I showed you tonight, so depending on the size there, but in a lot of the trail camera surveys that I've ran, I've done it with 4 or 5 trail cameras. I've done it with 10 cameras, and those properties range from 50 to 200 acres.
Right on. Okay, this one's for Duncan, and I guess that we'll have this be the last question. And like I said before, visit HuntStand.com next week. The field notes section, we're gonna provide answers to all the remaining questions that I have here on the sheet of paper in front of me. But this one for Duncan, you may have touched on it earlier a little bit, but this is probably one of our most common questions. As we all know, running a trail camera, really, it's the value of it is only as good as how you manage the tool itself. And people were really wondering, what are the best settings to eliminate false triggers? I know this is a question we get a lot, and I know you have the answer for it. So let's cover that, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, for sure. So I think before you even worry about the settings on the camera, you should consider the placement of that camera. As Josh mentioned earlier, facing that camera where it's not going to be pointing towards the sun, making sure that there's not branches that are fairly close that are blowing in the wind, or, grass that's growing tall. So I would say just be cognizant of that when you set that camera up. Take a weed eater with you, or even grab a stick, or, a saw, whatever, a hand saw, and just prune out those weeds, cut down some of those branches, give that camera a good opportunity to take photos without having a bunch of stuff blocking or blowing in the wind. When it comes to the settings, that's one thing that we implemented this year on the new for 23 cameras. You do have the ability to go in and adjust the PIR sensitivity on those, so you can adjust it from low to high. Keep that in mind. Every situation is different. Every scenario where you put a camera is different. So just monitor that camera, keep close eye on it. If you're starting to get runaway photos, then maybe change it to low. See if that helps. Maybe it's in the summer, and when that sun is at a certain point in the sky and the temperature's at a certain temperature, that you notice, hey, I'm getting most of my runaway photos are happening between 1 and 3 o'clock. Well, you can go into your setting and you can change it, especially in the summer when you're probably not going to get very many photos between 1 and 3 o'clock. You can go in and you can change that setting, the operating hours of that camera, where for a few hours that camera will not be taking photos. So I'd say those are probably the main settings to focus on there.
Good deal. Well, we're going to wrap it up here, and I guess that's that last question and your answer there hit on a key point, and that is we have all these awesome tools at our disposal. We have some of the best technology that we've ever seen, from ground blinds to trail cameras to smooth and fast shooting bows to some of the best rifles that we're probably going to see in history. All these different tools that we have at our disposal, but at the end of the day, just like woodsmanship, you need to be able to use those tools effectively. And it's not just a get out of jail free card. Like, you still need to know how to hunt the animal, and you need to know how to use your tools to do it effectively. So don't just think that you're going to be able to buy your way into success. You're going to be able to use these tools effectively if you put in the right research and spend the right amount of time in TLC, just like you do with every other aspect of the hunt. If you can identify natural food sources and figure out how to size buck tracks versus doe tracks and all those core skills in combination with being able to properly use the technology, you're going to have a lot better success. And that's what we're all striving for. So thanks for everybody who attended this event, everybody who stuck around. And I will mention one last time, because I know you guys want to know, the code is Masterclass 23, all one word, for 20% off any trail camera from Stealth Camera Muddy and any accessory from HME, Hunting Made Easy, for 48 hours. So once again, thank you for attending this hunt class with HuntStand. We're going to have more coming down the line, including an elk calling class eventually here in a month or so. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.